UFC Vegas 24, aka UFC Fight Night. We have Robert the Reaper Whittaker taking on Kelvin Gastelum. Boxing MMA picks. We are back, of course, with our main card predictions. Boxing MMA picks is a page dedicated to giving you UFC breakdown, UFC analysis, letting you know which fights are worth the odds, which fights you want to avoid with the odds, which underdog picks perhaps have a chance. And if you stick around to the end of the video, might even give you a little bit of parlay action as well. Now, as usual, I go by the name of Harris, flying solo today, giving you the review. We had the prelim video earlier on. Please check out that video if you haven't done so already. Main card predictions coming up in this one. Definitely appreciate it if you subscribe, if you like what you hear. And of course, let's have a really good conversation in the comments. Let us know how you feel about the picks that you are about to hear, and let us know some action that you're participating in this weekend. So, again, 6 fights on the main card this time around. So, a nice compact card. We're going to get right into fight number 1, Ricardo Ramos versus Bill Algeo. I'm going to start off by saying this is a very tough fight to call. This is a close one, and I think Vegas is really respecting both fighters with the odds that are presented in this one. This is essentially a pick 'em. Ricardo Ramos, I mean, he lost his last fight versus an undefeated Lerone Murphy. Tough fight overall in that one. I mean, he's always gonna put on a good show. Ricardo Ramos, he's always gonna be in a good fight. He's a good overall fighter, right? A good flow in his stand-up, heavy leg attack. Good feints, decent hands, good wrestling, good jiu-jitsu. He's one of those fighters who's always facing good competition, right? He's still only 25 years old, still very young for the division, still very young for the UFC. And he's one of those fighters that could have, one of those runs in the UFC that happens, several years into his UFC career, almost a la Charles Oliveira style, right? For Bill Algeo, I mean, somewhat of a similar fighter. He's a long fighter as well. I know these guys are similar in terms of the reach. Bill Algeo is a much taller fighter, at 3 inches taller than Ricardo Ramos. But nonetheless, I mean, he's a long fighter, pretty long kicks in his own right, very relaxed in the stand-up, good flow in his stand-up as well. One thing that he's going to do a little bit differently than Ricardo Ramos is he's going to switch stance quite a bit. He's going to throw combinations with the hands and the feet, whereas Ramos is maybe a little bit more leg heavy. But again, Bill Algeo, very leg heavy attack in his own right? Very good matchmaking by the UFC, I have to say that. Decent clinch and some takedown defense, but that won't even really matter. I think this one is going to stay on the feet. And what's interesting is that Bill Algeo has probably looked better in his last fight compared to the way that Ricardo Ramos looked in his last fight, obviously taking on a loss, as we see there on the screen. But what's interesting to note in this fight, and the reason I'm going to go with Ricardo Ramos, I do think Ricardo Ramos is the slightly more skilled fighter. I think he's taken on better competition. Let's take a look at both of the records here. At 14-3, Ricardo Ramos has taken on some names. Lerone Murphy, Journey Newsom was a solid matchup. Said Nurmagomedov was a solid challenge as well. And if we take a look at Bill Algeo, to me, the level of competition just doesn't stack up. I mean, you see guys like Spark Carlisle. Yes, you see Ricardo Lamas on there, which he lost, but Ricardo Lamas was 38 years old in that fight. So, I mean, again, I think that Ricardo Ramos has taken on slightly better competition. I'm looking at this, again, respectfully, as a slight step down in competition for Ricardo Ramos, whereas I'm looking at this as a slight step up in competition for Bill Algeo. To some degree, it could be, from a level of competition perspective, a situation where Gastelum versus Ian Heinisch. Heinisch was moving up in terms of level of competition. Gastelum was slightly moving down. And we almost saw an uncharacteristic Ian Heinisch in this one, in that one. We saw him be outclassed. I'm not saying that this happens in this fight specifically, but that is a factor to consider. So close odds, I think close odds for good reason. I think there are some reasons to like Bill Algeo in this fight, especially as the slightly taller fighter. But again, I'm going with the fighter who I believe is slightly more skilled and has a slightly better resume, and that is Ricardo Ramos, edging out a very close one. This is one of those fights that could end up being a split decision. You definitely want to stay away from this in terms of putting any actual money on it. Let's move on to fight number 2, Luis Pena versus Alexander Munoz. I mean, we know Pena at this point, violent Bob Ross. He has some serviceable stand up. I'm not going to say it's great, but I will say it is serviceable. It's one where you can kind of expose him. He doesn't really have much head movement. The stand up is kind of predictable. He'll incorporate the leg kicks in there, but a lot of his stand up is kind of just to show it rather than really put anything behind it. Um, doesn't even really sort of outpoint you as well. You see significant strikes landed per minute at the lower end of pace there at just over 3 per minute. He throws primarily one punch at a time. Has some decent fakes. I will say that has some good fakes, good feints. But we know he's gonna have that grappling game. We know he's gonna use his length. We know he's gonna body lock you. We know he's gonna try to land a submission. We know he's gonna have decent ground and pound as well. Not a smothering takedown game. Only just under 1.5 takedowns per fight. Only 33% accuracy. But again, almost like with Mackenzie Dern, the way we spoke about last week, if he can get you down, that ground game is really going to show its advantage there, potentially. But he has a hard time getting you down, right? So it's going to be an interesting dynamic to see what happens, especially versus his opponent, Alexander Munoz. We know this guy is a pure wrestler first. He's a really good wrestler. Not the best stand-up whatsoever. Makes it really obvious that he's going for takedowns. We're going to have to see how, where is the stalemate going to happen and who is going to nullify who, right? Is Munoz going to be able to nullify Pena's strengths, being the grappling, being taking this fight to the ground? Again, Munoz is a pure wrestler. So we know that he's going to have that knowledge on the ground. That might completely stop Pena from even taking him down. But what's going to be interesting is that Munoz doesn't have that stand-up. Guys that beat Luis Pena are guys that have much better stand-up than him with some form of takedown defense. Munoz obviously checks the box with takedown defense, but he doesn't check the box with the striking. So in this fight, again, I'm going to have to go with the fighter who I feel is just more talented or has more tools in the tool belt, and that is Luis Pena. I think in a stand-up battle that won't offer much on either side, I think Luis Pena still has the advantage there. I think, of course, Alexander Munoz has the wrestling advantage, but should this fight go to the ground, we know Luis Pena is very happy pulling guard. We know he's very happy fighting off of his back, and it's going to be a question of can Munoz handle, the grappling that Pena has to offer in this one. Reluctant pick. I'm not putting any money on this one. I'm staying away completely. Pena does not impress me at this level. Munoz doesn't really offer me anything for me to pick him. So I'm going to go with Luis Pena. Again, a bit of a hesitant pick here. I think Munoz is a bit too predictable. We've seen guys, for a pure wrestler to only average 2.5 takedowns per fight at 35% accuracy. That tells you how much he telegraphs it, how much guys prepare for that, and how much guys, as the fight goes on, how much they're able to stuff his takedown. So again, Pena just offers a little bit more here. I think he gets the job done. And again, potentially minus 140 could be some good value for you there. Although I personally don't throw any money on that whatsoever. Let's move on to fight number 3. Abdul Alhassan versus Jacob Malkoun. I'll keep this one short. Alhassan is on a 2-fight losing streak. He had a very tough loss in his last fight versus Chaos Williams. He suffered a bad round 1 KO. He's put to sleep in that one. That was only 5 months ago. You do have to ask yourself where his mind is at. What type of effect did that have on him? He's not the youngest fighter anymore. He's 35 years old, if I'm not mistaken. So, that's going to be interesting. That's going to be a factor here, right? He weighed in at 172 in his last fight. This fight is occurring at 185. Again, that is potentially a factor here. A few other things I'll mention about Alhassan as well. Still very explosive. Still has that kind of one punch power, the very explosive hands. He shows that especially early in the fights. We saw him land it and go for it versus Munir Laziz. But Laziz was able to survive it. He ate his power. He showed his chin in that one, respectively. Questionable cardio. Of course, he has that muscular frame, so I don't think he'll have a problem filling out 185 whatsoever. But his cardio tank, if you watch that Munir Laziz fight, his cardio tank was done 3 minutes into that. A bit of a one-dimensional fighter, of course. He's going to be that guy that looks for the knockout. You can't really trust those kinds of fighters. Again, as we saw in the Laziz fight, if you survive the early onslaught, what does that type of fighter become? That type of fighter doesn't really offer you much after the fact. And that's never a good thing in terms of if you're betting some money. So I'm going to be very hesitant to make a bet on Alhassan here. That said, he's 10-3. All of his wins are by KO. Watch Jacob Malkoun versus Phil Hawes. I'm not comparing Alhassan to Phil Hawes, but Hawes was able to win that fight in the first round via KO, ultimately with the first punch that touched Malkoun. Malkoun, to me, has a very questionable chin. I think I saw everything that I needed to see in that fight alone. Malkoun fought scared. He knew Hawes had the power. He knew that that if Hawes landed on him, he knew he was going to be in trouble. And then when Hawes landed on him, he was in trouble, and that was the end of the fight. So again, for that Hawes fight alone, I can see Alhassan having the exact same result in this one. I actually don't think Alhassan will have a problem landing the KO in this one, the way that he has in some of his previous fights. So I'm looking for him to get a pretty early stoppage here. I can even see a round one KO. I will say again, just be a little cautious. You either want to jump on that and include that in a parlay right away at minus 300, or you potentially want to see what happens live in that fight. And I don't know, maybe just avoid that one completely just in case. Fight number 4. Let's look at Andrei Arlovski versus Chase Sherman. Now, again, this is a tough one. This is a very tough fight. Andrei Arlovski, 30-20. You never like seeing a fighter that has 20 losses because that tells you anything can happen in their fights. Chase Sherman, 15-6. So again, these are guys that either are going to win or are going to lose. Andrei Arlovski is 2-1 in his last 3 fights. Again, at this point in his career, you always got to ask yourself what type of fighter you see so far along into their career. Some things that you like, some things that you don't necessarily like. I know he's been taking people's power lately. He's been very patient in the stand-up. He's keeping his distance. He's shown that he can fight 3 rounds, especially, and that's very meaningful in heavyweight fights. But we saw what somebody like Tom Aspinall was able to do to him. Tom Aspinall put the hurt on him. Arlovski did survive that sort of first barrage and even kind of caught Tom Aspinall himself. But that young explosive power, I mean, that was just too much for him, unsurprisingly. I mean, Tom Aspinall is definitely a prospect in the division. So, gotta show respect on that. And again, Arlovski did have his moments. Whereas with Chase Sherman, he competed in bare knuckle fighting. He was 1-1 in that. And I actually think that helps his stand-up. I actually think that helps his UFC stand-up quite a bit, and perhaps particularly in this fight. If you watch his subsequent fight versus Ike Villanueva, yes, he was the bigger fighter in that one. Ike didn't really look like he should be in the heavyweight division, to be completely honest with you. But Chase Sherman kind of impressed me in that one, especially as the fight went on. You see there that he got the win from an elbow and some punches in round 2. But Chase Sherman really started to impress me in that fight with the stand-up that he presented. His combos started to become cleaner and a little bit more diverse as that fight was going on, as he sort of found the timing in that fight. He doesn't overswing. He doesn't, swing wildly. He doesn't swing out of control. He keeps it controlled. This fight could go either way in a lot of ways. I actually think we're in for a sneaky good fight on the feet here, where both guys are going to have moments. Both guys might even have moments where they hurt each other, or both guys are just going to be, 3 rounds of pretty decent striking on both sides. Again, this is tough. This could go either way. I can't necessarily give Sherman the W simply due to age. We see that he's 11 years younger, but we also see Andrei Arlovski has shown his worth in his 40s. I can't go with Sherman simply based on age, but what I will do is I will go with Chase Sherman based on his combos and based on having sort of cleaner moments in the exchange. Again, I think the bare knuckle fighting helped him to be able to take on a punch coming to his face. And I think that's going to fare well in this fight. So I'm going with Chase Sherman on this. Hesitant pick in some ways. It is heavyweight beware, no matter which way you slice it. But I'm going with Chase Sherman on this fight. So in that case, let's move on to our co-main event. We have Jeremy Stephens versus Drakkar Klose. I'm going to break down Drakkar Klose first. He has pretty good stand-up, in my opinion. Throws a lot of power into his power punches. Definitely shows some speed in his strikes as well. Puts a lot into his kicks. Really pay attention to his leg kicks. Coming from that back leg, throws a lot on that. And kicks are definitely going to be something that I think we see from both sides in this fight. He's very willing to engage. He's usually the one that's pushing the pressure, usually the one that's pushing the pace as well. Pretty prone to takedowns. I don't see that being a huge factor in this fight. I mean, Jeremy Stephens only averages just over 1 takedown per fight. Not really the best in clinch situations though, and that's going to be interesting. I'm going to be real interested to see if Jeremy Stephens uses that. Drakkar Klose usually finds his back against the cage in sort of those clinch moments. So not good for him in terms of the eyes of the judges, and potentially something that Jeremy Stephens could use. What's important to note here is Jeremy Stephens. I mean, obviously he's not to say old, but with that type of record, 28 wins, 18 losses, again, one of those UFC records that kind of age you a little bit more than your age on paper. So he's only 34 years old, but he is going to be somewhat the older fighter in this. He's winless in his last 5. His last win came in February 2018 versus Josh Emmett. Since then, a loss to Jose Aldo, a loss to Zabit, no contest versus Yair. Following a rematch versus Yair, he then lost pretty badly to Kelvin Gastelum in terms of the end of that fight. But I want you guys to watch that fight versus Kelvin Gastelum because he showed me a lot in that fight. He's a pretty good kickboxer, showed good moments throughout that entire Kelvin Gastelum fight. He outstruck him at times, at least right until the last 30 seconds of the first round where Kelvin Gastelum hurt him. You could argue Stephens was probably winning that fight, right? He changed the pace of that. Sorry, that one punch changed the pace of that fight, and then kind of from there it was somewhat over for Jeremy Stephens until it eventually was over. But Jeremy Stephens showed me good timing in that fight. He showed me good speed. He showed me good striking defense. He showed me a really good calf kick. We saw what he's able to do in his previous fights. And we saw what he was able to do to Kelvin Gastelum again in that first round. Good pressure, good pace. Definitely puts the pressure on. This one, to me, again, I'm always going to analyze how I think these fights are going to go. I do think that this fight stays on the feet, for one. I think that Drakkar Klose has a good chin, for 2. I also think Drakkar Klose would be the bigger fighter. He's more true to that 155-pound lightweight division, whereas Jeremy Stephens, he's had a few fights at 145 pounds. And I think the only reason why he's coming back up to lightweight is because he missed his last fight by 4.5 pounds. So you kind of have to move up at that point. Jeremy Stephens is very capable. Obviously, he's the favorite in this fight. He is very capable. He will use that calf kick. That calf kick will be effective. We're going to have to see how Drakkar Klose game plans against that calf kick. In some ways, I actually see this fight going, or at least ending, the same way that the Kelvin Gastelum fight ended versus Jeremy Stephens. And what I mean by that is I think Stephens will have moments on the feet I think he'll have early moments in this fight where he is winning in the stand-up. But I think that those winning moments are actually going to be the moments that leaves him open to catch a big return, to catch a big shot by Drakkar Klose, who again puts a lot into his power punches, a lot into his strikes. And I think that it might be lights out for Jeremy Stephens from there, or he might hurt him, right? Again, when you've been in that many UFC wars, 28 wins, 18 losses, at some point your chin has to chip away. And I think Drakkar Klose has that type of power to really put Stephens away in that fashion. Again, this is a tough fight. Jeremy Stephens, I don't think he should be the favorite at minus 140. I think this should either be a pick'em, or I think Drakkar Klose should be maybe a minus 120, maybe even a minus 130. So for that alone, kind of under that logic alone, I am going to go with the underdog in this fight, Drakkar Klose, and I think potentially it happens by knockout. Let's move on to our main event. In that case, main event of the evening, we have Robert the Reaper Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum. This is a tough main event. I mean, both of these guys are in their athletic primes. I actually think they're the same age, if I'm not mistaken. Let's pull this one up. Pretty much the same age, 29 years old, Kelvin Gastelum, 30 years old, Robert Whittaker. We know Whittaker, of course, is going to be the taller fighter with a little bit more reach, as is the case with most of Kelvin Gastelum's opponents. We know that he gives up quite a bit of size in this middleweight division. But I mean, hey, listen, even with giving up the size, even with giving up the length, even with giving up the height, before Israel Adesanya lost at 205, Kelvin Gastelum was probably the one that provided him with his stiffest competition at 185. So I mean, we definitely know Gastelum is at that top tier level. When I look at Robert Whittaker, what I see from him, I mean, of course, really good takedown defense, 84% takedown defense in 16 UFC fights. That is pretty meaningful, especially with Kelvin Gastelum's sneaky good wrestling that he has. Robert Whittaker, I mean, we know that he's going to be, pretty light on his feet. We know that he's going to have that good speed in and out. We know that he's going to have that good lateral movement around the ring. We know he's going to have good timing. We know he's going to have a good long jab, where if he can find the timing on that jab, it could really be a frustrating tool. Like we saw in the Jared Cannonier fight, where Robert Whittaker won pretty handily in that one. And I mean, kind of has that signature 1-2 followed by a back leg high kick. That's a sneaky one, and that's definitely a devastating combo. He's hurt a lot of people with that one. This is an interesting clash of stand-up styles. Kelvin Gastelum, of course, we know is a southpaw. Good balance to his stand-up. I like his boxing, especially good striking defense, good speed. It's going to mix in some kicks too. I won't say the kicks are his strong suit, but he'll definitely mix them in there. As I mentioned earlier, I believe in the prelim video, he really outclassed Ian Heinisch in his last fight. He showed that he definitely deserves to be on that top tier level. And here he is taking on the number one contender in Robert Whittaker. Again, you can't count out the fact that Kelvin Gastelum has a BJJ black belt. He's very comfortable on the ground. He showed it in the Heinisch fight. I mentioned earlier, he showed that sneaky good wrestling in that fight as well. And really just take a look at Kelvin Gastelum's last 5 fights. I mean, this is a fighter that, should a few things have gone his way, we could be looking at a fighter with a really different record here, right? I mean, he beats Jacare, split decision, tough matchup versus Israel Adesanya. Very clearly lost that, though. Arguable decision versus Darren Till. I actually thought you could make a case where he did win that fight. And then Jack Hermansson, he was winning for the first minute of that fight until he tried to get up from a takedown position. Hermansson caught the ankle, heel hook, fight was over from there. So, I mean, you're looking at a fighter who could easily have 2 more wins to his resume and 2 less losses. He could be 19-4, much higher ranking, sort of much higher respect within the division as well. And I think in some ways we see him here at plus 200 or plus 210 at this point. I don't think Vegas is necessarily giving him sort of the full credit or full respect that he deserves. I'm actually going to make a pretty big underdog call here. I'm going with Kelvin Gastelum. As I mentioned, with these bigger fights, I like to think about how the fight could go. And what I see in this fight, I see a fight where both of these guys are going to keep it on the feet. I think despite their sort of lack of takedown numbers, including number of takedowns as well as percentage, both of them have pretty underrated ground games. I think they're wrestling, regardless of who you feel is better in what, whether you feel Gastelum has a slightly better wrestling, whether you feel Gastelum has a slightly better grappling. I feel like both of their ground games will essentially cancel each other out. And we're looking at a clash of styles in the stand-up. Whittaker has a little bit more movement-based stand-up, where he's going to use that jab more often, going to use lateral movement more often, potentially fight from the outside, throughout the entire fight. Of course, have his moments where he goes in. We sort of saw that versus Darren Till, but I think primarily he's going to fight from the outside in this one. Whereas with Kelvin Gastelum, he's going to look to kind of put that pressure on. He's going to look to potentially control the center. He's going to look to implement a slightly more technical style of boxing as opposed to, sort of that MMA striking type of style. We know that Kelvin Gastelum trains with Rafael Cordero. I mean, he's one of the best in the game when it comes to striking, to say the least. I mentioned earlier, I think this one stays on the feet for so many different ways. And in a striking match, I'm going to lean on the side of the fighter, in my opinion, who is more of a pure striker, who puts those combinations together a little bit better. I mentioned Whittaker has that 1-2 followed by a high kick, has a good straight punch in general as well, and just his 1-2s in general. But Gastelum provides a sort of a more pure technique when it comes to throwing a variety of different combinations. And I think those variety of combinations will show themselves in the way that it did in the Israel Adesanya fight, again, at least early on in that fight. So again, I think stylistically, I personally like Gastelum's style of stand-up a little bit better in this one. I think it's a slightly more favorable style of stand-up. Obviously, Whittaker has a path here. He can very much win this fight. He's a favorite for a reason. He looked very sharp. Dare I say, look improved in that Jared Cannonier fight in comparison to even when he was a champion. And we saw how that movement created some problems in his fight versus Darren Till. The same could be present with that movement in this Kelvin Gastelum fight. But on that same note, Darren Till was able to cut him off at times. He was able to land on him a few times. And again, Kelvin Gastelum has that IQ to sort of implement the same ability to cut the ring off and have those moments where he can potentially land his combos. At the very least, to me, this fight is a 50-50 fight. And what that tells me is when I see a big favorite at minus 260 in Robert Whittaker versus a big underdog in Kelvin Gastelum at plus 210 in a fight that I feel is 50-50, I'm definitely going to have to side on Kelvin Gastelum here. I think he can get it done. I think it's going to be a close fight. I think it's going to be a good fight. But again, I'm making a big underdog call here, and I'm going with Kelvin Gastelum. On that note, let's take you guys to Vegas. Let me let you know how I feel about this entire card. Similar to the prelim video, I suppose I'll start with some underdog picks here. And I mean, I mentioned it with the last two fights of the main card. Kelvin Gastelum, Drakkar Klose. I might even throw a small amount on this little parlay here. Let's show $25, for example. That could return 162. I don't want to promote a parlay on that one, so I won't show a bigger number. But two underdog picks there that I like in this one to potentially pull it off. If I were to take a look at some favorite picks here from the prelim video, I am going to double up on Tracy Cortez. I'm also going to double up on Lupita Godinez. I really like those two ladies to get it done in their respective fights. If I'm considering the main card, I think I want to add, I'm going to add Abdul Alhassan on that one. I know I said a little bit of a puncher's beware with Alhassan in terms of being able to trust him, But again, I don't think Malkoun's chin is going to hold up at all. I think he is going to get it done. And with those three, $100 will return to 48. And for our bigger betters, $250 will return 622. On that note, I'm going to finish off with that. Of course, this has been UFC Vegas 24, aka UFC Fight Night, Whittaker versus Gastelum. Main card predictions presented by Boxing MMA Picks. As usual, we would greatly appreciate if you guys were to like, rate, comment, subscribe, just do all that algorithmic stuff that helps us out. Let's have some good conversation in the comments. Who are your underdog picks? Who are your favorite picks of this card? How do you feel about the Kelvin Gastelum pick? Do you feel that he gets it done? Do you feel that Whittaker is just too much? Let us know how you feel, and we're definitely here for some good conversation. As usual, I go by the name of Harris. This has been the UFC Vegas 24, aka UFC Fight Night, Whittaker versus Gastelum main card prediction video. And as usual, let's get this money.